this particular presentation on this Monday morning, I'm going to show you guys some short video clips that I think are instructional and interesting, and there's also going to be a few still photo slides too. But because of the fact that you're hearing the sound on the videos, I'm just going to be hanging out over here on the side, and I'm going to be letting the sound from the video be the sound for the slide, and I think it works better that way. So let's go ahead and get started. You can see a little bit of movement from the tire right here. There we got us a bad tire.
How fast it goes?
We're not really seeing anything like that.
Huh? How fast it goes?
We ain't getting nothing like that on the rim, we're just getting it on the tire.
Yeah.
See that?
Get a look at it. Hear that?
That was a noisy tire we were looking for, and we basically found that the tire itself was bad. Now, if we had seen the rim moving the same way the tire was moving, we'd know that the rim was bent, but the rim was running true, and so we determined that this was a problem with the tire. And of course, if the tire had any kind of warranty left on it, if it wasn't more than 6 years old and the tread, you know, looked good, they could go ahead and get an adjusted tire for that. But anyway, let's move on to the next slide now. You can get a kit that'll do that.
Exactly. Exactly.
Let Alan see that. See there? Mm-hmm. That's cool. He's got it. My buddy has a shop not all that far from here, Donnie, and the guy that was having him restore this Mustang, I mean, Donnie didn't do the paint work, but he put those sequential turn signal package on there, and he actually did the engine. But what was funny about that was the guy had a 302 that he wanted to put in there, and so he told Donnie that he would bring the 302 so that he could rebuild it. And initially it was, you know, just an engine that had come out of a car and it would spin freely and all that. But this guy decided he was going to wash the engine himself in as much as he could and clean the inside of it out, and he used Dawn dishwashing detergent, and it laid there long enough after he did that it locked everything up. So Donnie made this guy take the thing and you know, pull it apart, you know, the right way and lay the parts out in order and all. And he made this guy do some of the work tearing the engine down because the guy had done what he had done, messing it up with that Dawn dishwashing detergent. But this turned out to be a beautiful, incredible car whenever he was through working on it. The only part of the video that I took was those cool sequential turn signals, though. Anyway, this right here, this tends to be a big problem. You know, this is a killer. If this thing comes off going down the road, this tire turns into a shopping cart wheel. Right. And you cannot steer this truck. You will go under a semi-truck and you will die. Yeah. So the other ones aren't that bad. See that steering damper? We're going to be replacing that steering damper too. That steering damper's leaking. It's been bent. We've got another one of those over there. Yeah. Now this one over here, it's not used up. It's been replaced. This one right here has got pretty good. But we do have a little bit of something going on with this ball joint here. But you know, we really need to replace that eventually. But right now we're most worried about this. We're going to get to that, but we're not going to do that right now. We're going to probably do it a little bit later. Anyway, right now we're going to do this one here. Okay. Now the important is the distance between here. You know, the length of this rod is all important. You know, and we need to be able to figure out how far it is. If you want to measure from that sleeve to here, then you can usually do better. Like you're going to try to find the center line of this and measure from the sleeve to there. And when you counting the turns is okay, it'll just put you in the ballpark though. It's usually about 22 turns or something like that. Anyway, when you loosen just that one, don't loosen that one, just this one, and screw that out. And then when you screw it back in, you need about the same number of threads showing, but you also need the distance to be from here to here the same. And that way the toe won't be also bad. We're still going to put it on a lift when we're through and do an alignment on it. Now this is a legitimate upsell on front end work, and as a matter of fact that tie rod end is actually dangerous, but there are some shops, and there's one particularly that I know of around here that will actually take the car and put it up on the lift and claim there's a lot of stuff wrong with it that's not wrong with it. And I know this for a fact that they've done this, because I've heard of, this other guy, this guy that owns a tire shop says he has received second opinion calls from people that had been told they needed $700 or $800 worth of front end work at that particular shop. And my aunt has drove a 92 Crown Victoria. She passed away in 2020, but she went to that same shop and they told her she needed $750 worth of tie rod ends, ball joints, and all this kind of thing because it was not safe and it was going to kill her and all this kind of stuff. So rather than paying them all that money, she brought the car over to me, her and my dad, and I raised it up on the lift. And yeah, that car was a 92 model and it had been on the road a while, but there was nothing wrong with any of those front end parts. I couldn't even find a busted boot. And why in the world they didn't think that they would get found out on that? I guess the times that people go ahead and tell them to do it are enough that they can make a lot of money on their bottom line. But you might notice this one came in for a brake job, and we had also put sway bar links on it. Now that one there you can't see it, but there is a cotter key in that castle nut, so I just wanted to make sure everybody was clear on that. But like I say, if you find legitimate front end problems, particularly something that's as dangerous as this bad tie rod end, it needs to be addressed, because you can be remiss in not taking care of a problem like that. Wow, is that good? There's another one. That one is not as bad, but it still needs to be replaced. Typically, though, what people will do on these, and I think on this one, what you have to do is replace the whole upper A-frame. And that's pretty much what we did on this one here. The A-frame doesn't cost that much. That's not all that hard to change. But that was one.
Yeah, that's not good at all. That might make a popping noise, doesn't it?
Now, that's an important one. It needs to be replaced. And, you don't want this thing coming apart whenever you're turning in. I actually put a slide up last week about a Ford pickup that had lost a ball joint like that whenever it was turning. Parking lot maneuvers, and particularly when you're sitting still turning the wheels back and forth, you're putting a tremendous amount of strain on those front end parts. And so if you're turning your wheels, it's wise not to turn your wheels unless the car is moving. But if you're just sitting still turning the wheels back and forth, you can't believe how much force is being applied to those front end parts, and it's just a bad idea to do that very much if you want your front end parts to last a while. Well, with this picture, that AC compressor pulley was just worn completely out. The bearing was shot and everything, and a lot of times people will drive them until they can't stand to listen to the noise anymore, or until the thing locks up. One day, this girl came and said that, she was one of my students, and she said the engine was locked up on her car. And so I said, that's hard for me to believe that the engine would be locked up, and it was like a 94 Pontiac Grand Am, black one. And so I sent a couple of my students over there. One of them had a pickup, and I had them a tow strap, and I said, bring that vehicle over here. So they went to her house and they dragged it back to the school. Of course, the administrators would have been fussing about that, because if there had been some kind of a crash, they felt like we'd have been responsible. But anyway, they brought it back, and you try to start it, and you go thunk, thunk, thunk. And so I says, okay, what I want you to do is get under here, and one of my muscled up boys, I said, put it on, raise it up a little bit. I said, get under there on a creeper and put a breaker bar and a socket on that crank bolt. Now let's turn the crankshaft. Make sure you turn it the direction it runs, which is clockwise on that one, I don't turn it backwards. That's a bad idea for, reasons I talked about the other day. But what happened was this, when he turned it, I could see everything was turning except for the belt was slipping on the AC clutch pulley. And so I managed to buy just a bearing for that AC clutch pulley. Now there are kits that you can do to take the compressor off and just put a pulley there. But for $17, we bought a bearing and replaced the bearing in that compressor clutch pulley, and we got her back on the road without it needing, her dad had told her he thought it was a starter. This same girl one morning called on about that same car, and she said, my transmission is not working right, it's taking off in high gear. And she says, and so I said, well, check the fuses. And so she hung up the phone and said, okay. And so she showed up at school a little bit later, and she says, hey, whenever you said check the fuses, my dad said you were a total idiot. She said, but I found a blown fuse, and when I replaced it, the transmission worked normally. I thought that was pretty funny, because it'll default to that, to the highest gear if the, on a lot of transmissions, if the power is lost. There was a guy on a Jeep Cherokee that came one time, and he had his own little shop. He came to the dealer where I was working, and he says I can shift this transmission in this Jeep manually, but it won't shift automatically, and I rebuilt the transmission, and I've been working on it for 6 weeks, and I don't know what to do with it. And so I reached under the dash on the passenger side and pulled that wire harness down going to the transmission computer, and there was a red 10 amp fuse there, and I pulled it out, it was blown, and I put another fuse in there, and it shifted out just like it was supposed to. And that was just funny as all get out, because he'd been busting his rear end on that. You can actually overthink something. A lot of times people will just charge in there and they'll do what they know how to do without surgically troubleshooting. So he could have swapped out that fuse when that vehicle came into his shop, I expect. Because you didn't need to rebuild the transmissions on those Jeep Cherokees very much. And this was like the one starting in '87 going to about 1990. It was in that window, the one he was talking about and everything. Anyway, he was a funny guy, but he was happy to get it taken care of.
It looks like a little blown head gasket. Said that stinky smelling smoke is coming out of the pipe as soon as you start it. Now he does say that when it warms up a little bit, when they say when it warms up a little bit, it quits doing that quite so much. I think he got a little head gasket issue here. And this is a Dodge Ram, and it is a 3.7 outstanding performance. Timing chain for this one cost $500.
The funny story is that once we put the cylinder head back on a Toyota Camry, it was like a '89 model, and after we put the cylinder head back on it, it was blowing steam out the exhaust. But it wasn't the kind of steam that I was used to. It smelled kind of clean and fresh. And then what I found out was one of the guys, when he was reconnecting the vacuum lines, hooked up the windshield washer bottle to the intake manifold, and the intake was sucking water out of the windshield washer bottle, and it made a nice little puddle of blue water back there under the tailpipe. That wasn't hard to fix.
The tires are rolling. The spider gears are actually moving along with everything else. Now up in there you see the pinion gear spinning, and right here you see the ring gear spinning. You got both tires rolling. If you stop one tire, those spider gears in there will start working so that one tire can turn faster than the other.
See, those gears in the middle aren't interacting with each other as far as rotating against each other unless you're turning, and then they rotate a little bit. That's why they call this the differential. The center part of this is actually the heart of the differential. Of course, the torque is transmitted through the pinion gear and the ring gear out to both axles. But anyway, I just wanted you to see that. For some reason, it bothers me to leave those red lines on the screen. I don't know why.
Are we bouncing it? Get it started bouncing. It just keeps on bouncing, don't it?
It does.
Yay! All right then.
Bouncing, you don't usually see shocks that bounce this much, but that's definitely some bad shocks on there. You can also inspect them and see if they're leaking and stuff like that. But that one definitely needed some shocks. Here's another one. that's a 2005 Cadillac, and we had to put shocks on that. And when I ordered those from the parts store, the parts store guy got them from the dealer, and he had them. He charged me $140 a piece for them, and he wouldn't admit that he got them from the dealer. I called him. I said, "Did you get these from the dealer?" See, his parts guy had gone, and his parts runner had picked them up from the dealer and brought them straight to me. And so he lied and says, "No, I didn't get those from the dealer. We got them from our regular parts pipeline." But I says, "Well, why does it, it had the name of the dealer on the box?" And good grief, what a mess. Why not just tell me the truth? Yeah, I bought them from the dealer and I marked them up. Long years ago, back in, I'm going to say 1978, I went with a friend of mine to a gun shop down in Texas. And I was going to buy some reloading equipment. And I did. I always paid cash for everything. And my buddy that was with me, he was older than me, he had a little 32 automatic that he wanted to get rid of, and he was going to trade it in on a different gun, like a 357 or something. And the gun shop owner says, "Well, I can't give you but about $30 for that little 32 automatic because it's just not worth very much and it's not much of a gun." And so he turned to me and says, "Do you want to buy this for $30? I said, "No, I don't care anything about that. I don't need that gun." So he traded it in. The next week, I went back in that same shop, and I saw that gun laying under the counter for $85. And so I asked the gun shop owner, "Is that the same gun that you just traded with my friend for the other day?" This was like a week later. And that guy was stuttering and stammering and said, No, that's a different gun, blah, 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 blah. And I was thinking, why don't you just tell me, yes, I traded for it and marked it up, because that's how I stay in business, instead of trying to lie about it. I just don't understand this. There was a little LTD that I bought from some people one time. The guy worked at a parts store, and he had replaced all kinds of parts on that car, and they couldn't figure out why it wouldn't run right. And it was a nice little car, and I said, "I'll pay you $500 for it." And so they sold it to me for $500. And so I found out the catalytic converter was stopped up on it, and I took care of that problem. That's all that was wrong with it. He had replaced all kinds of ignition and engine control parts on it and everything. So I said, well, I drove it for a little while. I put a different radio in it, and I didn't hardly have anything invested in it, except for the $500. And so I figured I was going to go ahead and sell it, make a little bit. So I says, "I'm selling that car for, for $850. And so this one guy who was a little older than me and was sort of shrewd in his dealings, and he says, "I'll give you $775 for it." Well, what he didn't understand was I didn't really care if I sold it or not. And any time there is a sale going on, if there's a transaction being worked on, the person who cares the least is always the one that's in control. The guy that doesn't care if he buys it or not is in control if the seller has sweaty palms. And the person that's selling it, if he doesn't care if he sells it or not, but the other guy wants it really bad, you see what I'm saying? The person that wants the deal to go through the most is the one that will give up the most, right? Well, I told the guy, I says, "I'm not, I don't have to sell it at all, really. I can just keep driving it." And so he came to me one day and he says, "I've never in my life come up to somebody else's price without talking them down, but I'm going to give you $850 for that car." See, I was making $350 off the deal anyway. And so he says, he drove it for a while and then he sold it. And he says, I says, "What'd you get for it?" He didn't want to tell me. And I says, "I'm just curious as to what you got for it. I don't really care one way or another, but if you'll tell me what you got for it, you'll satisfy my curiosity." He says, "I sold it for $1,800. And I said, "Well, I'm happy for you. You made some profits." He thought I was going to get mad at him, because I guess that's the kind of people he'd been dealing with. But whatever you buy something for is your business, and what you sell it for is your business, and nobody has any business judging you about that, That leak right there is big enough to get rid of the air. This is the kind of slow leak that will get past you if you're only spraying soapy water on the tread, looking for maybe where they ran over a nail. This one here had oxidation, and you know how these aluminum wheels have a tendency to oxidize and get bumps and flakes and cavitation and all that. That was the cause of this. We broke this one side of this tire down and put some bead sealer on it and took care of that. I think that was off a Cadillac or something, I can't remember, but that was a cool little video of all those bubbles coming out of it.
We got a noisy alternator. We got our charger system sensor hooked up to it. That doesn't really look all that bad. George, turn that load knob a little bit to the right. A little bit to the right. Turn the load knob to the right. Turn it to the right. No, to the right. Yeah. Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. The load light will come on in a minute. Come on. Turn it more than that. Turn it more. Come on. Come on. Come on. There it is. There's your load light. All right, see there. See that? Now okay, let off. See, that thing is not, it's anemic. Because we're coming right off of there. This thing ought to show a lot more amps than it does. Rev it up a little bit, George. Raise the engine speed a little bit. Let me show you this a little better. So George is going to raise the engine speed. It's really bad, the noise it's making. Now, the interesting thing is, when we check the diode, oh, look at there. The diode, when we push the diode button to check to see, and it tells us the diodes are bad. Bad, George, bad. Okay.
That alternator had only been on that Toyota for about 3 weeks, and it was a tough one brand, the one that Advanced Auto Parts used to sell. I don't know what Advanced Auto Parts is selling now, and I've got nothing against Advanced Auto Parts, but it is what it is. That alternator was lousy, and it wasn't that old, and there really wasn't any excuse for that. I wrote a Motor Age article, just a brief one, about rebuilding alternators, and the rebuilders that do it. Visteon does some really, really good work rebuilding alternators, and what they'll do is they'll actually measure a lot of stuff on an alternator when they're rebuilding it that other remanufacturers won't, and like they will measure the diameter of the slip rings on the rotor, and they will replace those if they're worn down enough that they feel like they've been compromised. Most of the other rebuilders, from what Visteon was telling me when I was talking to the Visteon people on the phone, will just throw a set of brushes in it and do the least they can, and then bead blast the case and put a new pulley on it, and then they're done. And I can't really say that I know that for a fact, but that's what the Visteon guy told me, and I think he probably knows what he's talking about. But what was funny was, I said, in this J1930 regulation age, aren't we supposed to call these generators? He said, we don't care what J1930 says, that's an alternator. That was pretty good too. If you don't want to damage something that's behind the panel you're drilling through, but you have to drill there and you don't have to take a bunch of stuff apart that's behind it to keep from damaging it, you can put a piece of rubber hose, good stiff rubber hose, over your drill bit, and you cut the rubber hose so that it will not allow the drill to go any deeper than that, and that's when it'll stop. That way you get your hole drilled, but you don't, how a drill, when you're using it, will go shooting through there way far, and if you imagine if there's glass behind this, but you have to drill this hole for whatever reason, or you got to drill a rivet out or something, you don't want that thing going in there and shattering the door glass. And so there's, anytime you've got a situation like that where you're gonna be drilling a hole and you don't want to damage something, that piece of hose works really good. Now, what's wrong with this picture? I couldn't believe this. I was going through Taco Bell and I saw a Rivian electric pickup sitting at the gas pump. Now, they may have been filling up gas cans for their lawnmower, but why didn't they have an electric lawnmower if they believed enough in electric to buy a $90,000 Rivian pickup truck? This doesn't even make any sense to me, although it was a nice little optic, a little photo op, and I snapped a picture of it while it was sitting there. Always notice and address this kind of thing if you're working on somebody's vehicle and you're a professional technician. It is a dereliction of duty to leave a battery in this kind of shape. One of the things I always like to do was I get some of this battery cleaner spray that's made by CRC from the parts store, and I would just wet that thing down really, really good and let it work on that acid and stuff. And then I would move the car out behind the shop and I would hit that battery really hard with the high pressure wash, you know, and whenever you do that, after that battery cleaner's on there, all of this chalky stuff is gone. And you can also see the battery terminals better to determine if they need to be replaced because they partially melted away, or if you just need to replace the battery cable bolt, which I used to keep boxes of bolts and battery cable nuts in my, and you know, the nut's a special kind of nut and it goes on there a particular way, which people usually like to put them on there backwards for some reason. But anyway, I would always try to make sure that battery was in good shape. One time there was a guy that sometimes when I was at the Ford dealer, they, you know, some of the customers would hang out there. And for some strange reason, when I was at the Ford dealer, there were some customers I didn't mind watching me. And there were other ones I didn't want watching me. And it wasn't because I was trying to get away with anything. But if the customer's watching to make sure you don't do something wrong, that gets on my nerves. But if he's just hanging out, you know, and he trusts you, but he's hanging out anyway, I don't have a problem with those people. And I was changing out the battery in an F-Series pickup one time, and I noticed that his battery tray was all rusted and everything. And I had a brush on the drill and I brushed it all out. At the time, we were going through a sort of a recall program on some of the Explorers because they came without a battery box to protect the battery from engine compartment heat, and they would boil over and they would try to rust the battery box. And we were supposed to take the battery out and brush that battery box, blow all that stuff out of there, and then paint it with gray primer to protect it from further rusting. And so I went ahead and did that on this guy's F-Series pickup, even though it wasn't covered under that. And I was just getting through with that, and he says, you didn't have to go to all that trouble. You could have just swapped out the battery and I would have been happy. But I was trying to do a good job, and remember, every job is a picture of the person that does it. This is a funny little ad that I grabbed, and anybody that's ever worked around many people today, especially some of the younger people that come, some younger people are hard workers, and they said, look at this, please don't apply if you oversleep, have court often, don't have a babysitter every day, have to get rides to work later when our workday begins, experience flat tires every week, have to hold on to a cell phone all day, or become an expert at your job with no need to learn or take advice after the first day, must be able to talk and work at the same time, blah, blah, blah. This was absolutely funny. Now, I did change the, just for some privacy purposes, somebody posted it somewhere, but I changed the, you know, the name up here, and I also changed the phone number down here, so if you call that phone number, you're not going to get this place anyway, so don't get any ideas about that. You know, I didn't want to, something on my YouTube channel that might, you know, cause trouble, even if the people that posted this ad didn't give a rip. I saw this in town last week. I just had to snap a shot of it as it was going by. I was sitting at a traffic signal, and he was, you know, turning and going from the other way, and I whipped out this Sony Alpha 6000 camera I carry with me, and I snapped a shot of that, and it was sort of, you can tell that it was sort of moving, and there was some blur behind it. But these lights right here on the front of this thing, and some of you guys have probably seen this before, those were his turn signals, which I thought was pretty cool. Whenever he was turning, that was what was blinking. And somebody, you know, spent a lot of time and trouble fixing up this old, this looked like about a 52 or 3 model Chevy pickup truck. The Chevy pickups looked pretty much like this until mid-model year 1955, and then they changed them to the truck that later, I mean the 55 model that most of us are thinking about, but the first part of the model year in 1955, they still looked like this. And I think they looked like this from like 1951 to mid-1955 model year or whatever. Now this is a guy that was probably one of the sharpest, solid mechanics that I ever worked with. I mean, this guy was really, really good at just about everything that he did. And he's just sharp as a tack. And at the time in this picture, he was 27 years old, and this is the shop where he and I worked. You know, it sort of dates it because you see that old scope and that old Coke machine over there with a water fountain on the side. You know, that's 1977. That's when this picture was taken. This guy now manages a school bus shop for a city, and you know, they've got 40 or 50 school buses, and he's the boss man of that school, of that shop. He's got a really good reputation for doing excellent work and being totally honest, and he's just real sharp. He's a good friend of mine still. I see him ever so often. But he doesn't look like this anymore, though. You know, he's a whole lot older now. You can do the math. If he was 26 in 1977, you can imagine how old I was. 20 then when I worked with him. But one day, you know, he was. I would ask him for advice and stuff when I was getting ready to do something. And there was a Ford pickup that came in there. They parts out, brought a starter for it. I got under there. The starter, the little boss on the starter that went into the hole in the plate, you know, where you put the starter in place before you put the bolts in, wouldn't fit right. And I said, there's something wrong with the way the starter fits, you know. And he says, just, oh, shut up, boy, get under there and put that starter on there. So I got under there and I said, well, I'll try to make it work. So when I put it on there, and as I was tightening the bolts, it's kind of dumb. It broke one of the ears off the starter because it didn't fit. I shouldn't even try to put it on there. I blamed it on him, and we got a little bit of a shouting match about it. And he told me it was my own fault that I broke the starter. It had nothing to do with him. But there was a truck that came in there with a utility bed on it that belonged to the local cable TV company. And he said he laid down under the truck, and he had to, for some reason, he had to remove the spare tire. Well, they had put that spare tire up under there with a piece of something like 3/4 inch all thread, and they had with a nut screwed all the way up there, and that 3/4 inch all thread was sticking down about a foot underneath that tire, and it was rusty and coated with dirt and mud and all that kind of stuff. Obviously he didn't have a socket deep enough to spin that nut off. He was on there just fit to be tied because he was having to use an end wrench to take that nut all the way off past all those old rusty, dirty threads. And he says, what kind of an idiot would put a spare tire under here? I'll not put it back. I'm going to throw it in the back of the truck, blah, blah. But I learned from that. And every time I ever put anything on a pickup or whatever that had threads like that were exposed, that I didn't want them to get dirty in case somebody else, possibly me, had to take it back off, I would take a snug fitting piece of hose that would go over those threads, and I would slide that hose up over those threads. Didn't hurt a doggone thing, and it protected them from rust and dirt and all that, and made it easier for the next guy. So that's the way that I think. You know, I always want to make it easier for the next guy because the next guy may be me. Well, that's all for now. I hope you guys have a good week, and hey, let's be careful out there. We'll talk to y'all next time.